The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across Marysville, Utah, as Yates Stringer sat alone on his porch, his weathered hands clutching a pair of small leather boots that would never again touch the dusty ground. Each crease in the leather told a story, each scuff marked a memory of his son's laughter that now only echoed in his mind. It was 1876, 3 years since the typhoid fever had swept through town, taking his wife and 7-year-old boy within days of each other. The small cemetery plot on the hill overlooked the Stringer ranch, where Yates had buried his heart alongside his family. "Mr. Stringer." A woman's voice pulled him from his thoughts. He looked up, squinting against the dying light. Silhouetted against the sunset stood Sophia Fleming, the schoolteacher who had arrived in Marysville just 6 months ago. At 26, she had brought with her not just books and learning, but a persistent kindness that the townsfolk had come to admire. Even Yates, who avoided town whenever possible, knew of her reputation. "Evening, Miss Fleming," he said, his voice rough from disuse. He didn't stand or invite her onto his porch. The boots remained clutched in his hands. "I apologize for intruding," she said, but her posture showed no sign of retreat. She stepped closer, her blue dress catching the last rays of sunlight. "I've brought something for you." Only then did Yates notice the basket in her hands. The scent of fresh bread wafted toward him, stirring hunger he hadn't acknowledged in days. "That's not necessary," he said, though his stomach betrayed him with a quiet growl. "Perhaps not," she agreed, "but neighbors help neighbors in times of need." "I'm not in need," he said flatly. Sophia's eyes fell to the tiny boots in his hands. Without invitation, she climbed the 3 steps to his porch and set the basket beside his chair. Then she did something that startled him. She knelt down to eye level and placed her hand gently over his. "Fill them with hope again," she said softly, nodding toward the boots. Yates stiffened. "Pardon me, your son's boots," she said. "They shouldn't remain empty forever." Anger flashed across his face. "You don't know anything about my son or these boots. You've been here, what, half a year?" "Long enough to see a man drowning on dry land," she replied, unflinching. "The children at school talk about you, you know, the rancher who used to tell the best stories at town gatherings. The man who once built a playground behind the church so the children would have somewhere to play after Sunday service." "That man is gone," Yates said, his voice hard as iron. Sophia stood brushing dust from her skirt. "No, Mr. Stringer, he's just lost. And things that are lost can be found again." She turned to leave but paused at the top of the steps. "The school needs help, Mr. Stringer. The roof leaks something terrible, and with winter coming, the children can't learn when they're shivering. I've heard you were once good with your hands." "Find someone else," he said, though with less conviction than before. "I've asked everyone else," she replied. "I'm asking you now." She descended the steps with quiet dignity. "Think about it. The bread is still warm and there's apple preserves in the jar." Yates watched her retreating figure, a splash of blue against the darkening landscape, until she disappeared down the winding path toward town. Only then did he reach for the basket, the first gift he had accepted in 3 long years. The bread was indeed still warm. Morning came with a clarity that felt almost intrusive. Yates had slept better than he had in months, though he would never admit it had anything to do with the fullness in his belly or the conversation that had replayed in his mind before sleep claimed him. He went about his chores, mechanically feeding the horses, checking the fences on the north pasture, mending a broken wagon wheel. His ranch had once been among the most prosperous in the valley, but now it bore the same neglect as its owner. Fewer cattle roamed the fields, and the once white farmhouse had faded to a dull gray. By midday, he found himself standing at the small workbench in his barn, the pair of boots placed carefully beside his tools. He ran his finger along the stitching on one boot, remembering the day he'd bought them in Salt Lake City. His son, Daniel, had worn them proudly, strutting around like a miniature version of his father. Fill them with hope again. The schoolteacher's words had burrowed into his consciousness like a persistent splinter. What did she know of hope? What did she know of loss? Yet, as he hitched his horse to the wagon later that afternoon, he found himself loading not just the empty basket to return, but also his toolbox and several planks of wood he'd been saving for no particular purpose. Marysvale's schoolhouse sat at the edge of town, a simple one-room building that had seen better days. As Yates approached, he could see the problem immediately. The southwest corner of the roof had begun to sag, and several shingles had blown away in recent winds. He hadn't expected to find Sophia still there. School would have let out hours ago, but there she was, balanced precariously on a ladder, attempting to nail a patch of canvas over the worst of the damage. "Get down from there before you break your neck," he called, pulling the wagon to a stop. Sophia turned, surprise evident on her face. The movement caused the ladder to wobble dangerously, and Yates was out of the wagon in an instant, steadying it with firm hands. "Mr. Stringer," she said, a smile spreading across her face. "You came." "Appears that way," he replied gruffly. "Though I'm beginning to question my judgment, seeing as you're liable to kill yourself before I can fix a single thing." She descended the ladder carefully, and Yates noticed the smudge of dirt across her cheek and the determination in her eyes. There was something disarming about a woman who wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty. "I don't believe in waiting for rescue," she said, "but I won't refuse help when it's offered." Yates surveyed the roof. "This is more than a one-day job. The whole thing needs replacing before winter." "I know," she sighed. "The town council says there's no money for it until spring. Spring will be too late. First heavy snow and this whole corner could collapse." Sophia's face fell, and Yates found himself unexpectedly affected by her disappointment. "I can fix it," he heard himself say. "Not just a patch job, a proper repair." "The council, let me worry about the council," he interrupted. "I've got lumber at the ranch, and Hank at the mill owes me a favor. We can have this fixed in a week if we work at it." Something bright and warm flickered in Sophia's eyes. "We." Yates cleared his throat. "Figure of speech, I meant I can have it fixed." "Of course," she said, but the smile that played at her lips told him she wasn't fooled. "Would you like some coffee? I was just about to make some." Inside, the schoolhouse was neat but sparse. Rows of desks faced a large chalkboard, and a small stove in the corner provided heat. Bookshelves lined one wall, though Yates noticed many were half empty. "Not many books," he commented as Sophia busied herself with the coffee. "No," she agreed. "Most of these are mine." The town's budget for books is even smaller than for repairs. Yates wandered the room, noting the care with which everything was arranged. Maps hung on the walls, clearly drawn by hand. A nature collection of rocks, leaves, and bird feathers sat on a table by the window, each item labeled in neat handwriting. "You've done a lot with very little," he observed. Sophia handed him a steaming cup. "That's teaching in a town like this. You make do with what you have and try to inspire curiosity with whatever tools are available." They sat in silence for a moment, the late afternoon sun casting golden rectangles on the wooden floor through the windows. "Why did you come to Marysvale?" Yates asked suddenly. "Young woman like you could teach in a bigger town. Better pay, more resources." "I could," she agreed. "But bigger isn't always better. I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania. There was a teacher there who changed my life, showed me worlds beyond our little valley through books and stories. I wanted to do the same for children who might otherwise never look beyond their own horizons." Yates nodded slowly. Noble cause. And you, Mr. Stringer? Have you always been in Marysvale? The question prodded at memories he usually kept locked away. Came here in '62 after the war. Wanted open spaces after seeing too many battlefields. He sipped his coffee. Bought the ranch, met my wife at a town dance that summer. She was visiting her cousin, convinced her to stay. She must have loved you very much to leave her home, Sophia said softly. She did, Yates agreed, his throat tightening unexpectedly. More than I deserved. A silence fell between them again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Yates found himself studying Sophia as she gazed out the window, her profile outlined by sunlight. Her brown hair was gathered at the nape of her neck, though several strands had escaped to frame her face. Her hands, wrapped around her coffee cup, were slender but showed signs of hard work, not the soft, pampered hands of a city woman. "I'll come back tomorrow," he said, setting down his cup. "Need to take some measurements, make a proper plan." Sophia turned to him, and the gratitude in her eyes made him look away. "Thank you, Mr. Stringer." "Yates," he corrected her. "If we're going to be working together on this roof, might as well use my given name." "Yates," she repeated, testing the sound of it. "And I'm Sophia." He nodded once, then stood to leave. At the door he paused. The bread was good. Haven't had homemade bread in a long while. Her smile was like the first ray of sunshine after a storm. "I'll bring more tomorrow." True to his word, Yates returned the next day with his tools and plans for the roof. He worked methodically, assessing the damage, measuring twice, and writing everything down in a small notebook he kept in his shirt pocket. Sophia taught her classes below, and occasionally Yates would pause in his work to listen to the rhythm of her voice as she guided her students through reading or arithmetic. There was a patience in her tone that spoke of genuine care for each child's understanding. During the lunch break, the children spilled out into the schoolyard, their excited voices carrying up to where Yates worked. One boy, no more than 9, broke away from the others and stood at the base of the ladder, looking up with unabashed curiosity. "Are you fixing our school, mister?" he called. Yates paused in his measurements. "Trying to. My pa says you don't talk to nobody no more, that you turned into a bear after your boy died." The bluntness of children could be like a knife to the gut. Yates felt his jaw tighten. "Your pa talks too much." To his surprise, the boy laughed. "That's what Ma says too." Despite himself, Yates felt the corner of his mouth twitch. "What's your name, boy?" "Timothy. Timothy Blackstone." The child puffed out his chest importantly. "I'm the fastest runner in school. Miss Fleming says I could outrun a jackrabbit. Does she now?" "Yep, and she says I'm good at sums too." "Are you good at sums, mister?" "Good enough to measure a roof without it falling on your head," Yates replied. Timothy considered this. "That's pretty good, I guess." He shuffled his feet. "My pa says your boy was nice. Said he always shared his candy when he came to the store." Something tightened in Yates' chest. "That sounds like Daniel." "Timothy," Sophia's voice called from the schoolhouse door. "Time to come back in." The boy gave Yates a gap-toothed grin. "Gotta go. Miss Fleming doesn't like us being late." He turned to run back, then stopped. "Will you be here tomorrow too?" Yates nodded. "Got a roof to fix, don't I? Good." And with that, Timothy sprinted back to join his classmates. Sophia stood at the door, watching the exchange. When her eyes met Yates, there was a warmth in them that made him look away first. That evening, as promised, Sophia appeared at the ranch with a fresh loaf of bread. This time, Yates invited her onto the porch properly, clearing off a chair that had long been used for nothing but collecting dust. They ate together as the sun set, sharing the bread with butter and more of her preserves. Yates found himself telling her about his plans for the roof, explaining the techniques he would use to ensure it would last through many winters to come. "You know a great deal about building," she observed. My father was a carpenter, Yates explained. Taught me everything he knew before I left for the war. Thought I'd follow in his footsteps, but the land called to me more than timber once I came west. You never lost the skill, though. Some things stay with you, he agreed, then fell silent, aware that the same could be said for grief. As if reading his thoughts, Sophia's gaze drifted to the porch railing where Daniel's boots now sat, placed there by Yates that morning without fully understanding why. Timothy mentioned your son today, she said carefully. He did, Yates confirmed. Said Daniel shared his candy. A gentle smile played across Sophia's lips. Children remember the kindnesses shown to them. It's a beautiful legacy. Legacy, Yates repeated, the word feeling heavy on his tongue. A man hopes to leave more than memories of shared candy. Is there a greater legacy than kindness? Sophia challenged gently. Than being remembered as someone who brought joy to others? Yates had no answer for that. Instead, he found himself asking, "Did you ever marry, Sophia?" "Have children of your own?" She shook her head. "No. I was engaged once before the war. John was a teacher too. He didn't come back from Gettysburg." The simple statement carried years of sorrow, and Yates felt a newfound respect for the quiet strength in this woman who had also known loss but had chosen to build rather than retreat. "I'm sorry," he said, meaning it. "Life takes unexpected turns," she replied. "We can only decide how to walk the path we're given." As she left that evening, Yates watched her go with a strange feeling in his chest, as if something long dormant was struggling to wake. The work on the schoolhouse roof began in earnest the next day. Yates had spoken with Hank at the mill, who not only honored the old favor but contributed additional lumber at cost when he heard it was for the school. Word spread quickly in a town like Marysvale, and by mid-morning, 2 more men had arrived to offer help. Ellie Patterson, the blacksmith, brought his strength and skill with metal for the roof braces. Samuel Tucker, whose daughter was in Sophia's class, arrived with his wagon loaded with shingles he'd been saving for his own barn. "My Annie says that schoolhouse is colder than a well-digger's feet in January," Samuel explained with a shrug. "Figure my barn can wait if it means she can learn her letters without catching pneumonia." Yates, who had grown accustomed to working alone, found himself falling into an easy rhythm with the other men. They worked steadily through the day, removing the damaged sections of roof while school continued below, with only occasional disruptions from the hammering and sawing above. At lunch, Sophia brought out sandwiches and coffee for all the men, her face alight with gratitude. The children watched the work with fascination, and several of the older boys begged to help, until Samuel finally relented and allowed them to carry bundles of shingles from the wagon to where the men worked. Timothy attached himself to Yates, following him like a shadow whenever he descended the ladder for supplies or measurements. The boy peppered him with questions about the work, about ranching, about horses, a never-ending stream of curiosity that Yates found himself answering with increasing patience. "You're good with him," Sophia observed quietly when the children had returned to class. "Timothy's father works long hours at the mine. He doesn't get much male attention." Yates watched the boy through the schoolhouse window, his dark head bent studiously over his slate. "He's a good kid, asks a lot of questions." "The best ones always do," she replied with a smile. As the sun began to set, the men agreed to return the next day. The worst of the damage had been repaired, but there was still much to do before the roof would be secure for winter. "You've started something here," Sophia said as she walked with Yates to his wagon. "More than just fixing a roof." "Don't know what you mean," he replied, though he did. He had seen the way the men had looked at him with a mixture of surprise and respect. The way the children had watched wide-eyed as the silent rancher who lived outside town suddenly appeared in their midst, working and occasionally even smiling. "You know exactly what I mean," Sophia insisted. "This town has missed you, Yates Stringer, whether you realized it or not." He had no response to that, so he simply nodded his goodbye and climbed into his wagon. As he drove home in the gathering dusk, he found himself thinking not of the empty house that awaited him, but of the day ahead and the work yet to be done. The repair of the schoolhouse roof became something of a community project over the next few days. More men appeared to help, and women brought food at midday pies, stews, and fresh bread that fed the growing crew of volunteers. Yates, who had avoided town gatherings for years, found himself at the center of this impromptu community effort. He directed the work with quiet authority, his expertise evident in every decision and measurement. The other men deferred to him naturally, and even Mayor Reynolds, who stopped by to observe the progress, treated Yates with newfound respect. "Didn't think we'd see you taking an interest in town matters again," the mayor commented on the third day. "Good to have you back among us, Stringer." Yates merely nodded, uncomfortable with the implication that he had returned to some former version of himself. He wasn't back, not really. He was just fixing a roof because it needed fixing, and because a determined schoolteacher had asked him to. Yet he couldn't deny that something was shifting inside him. Each morning, he rose with a sense of purpose that had been absent for years. Each evening, he returned home tired but satisfied in a way that tending his diminished ranch had never provided. And then there was Sophia. She moved through her days with a quiet grace that increasingly captured his attention. The way she managed 20 children of different ages and abilities, the patience she showed with slower learners, the joy that lit her face when a student grasped a difficult concept, all spoke of a depth of character that drew Yates like a moth to flame. On the fourth day of work, rain threatened. Dark clouds gathered on the western horizon by mid-morning, and Yates urged the men to work faster to close the open section of roof before the storm hit. They were racing against time, nailing down the last of the shingles when the first fat raindrops began to fall. Lightning flashed in the distance, followed by a rumble of thunder that sent the schoolchildren into a mixture of excitement and fear. "That's going to be a gully washer," Samuel observed, looking at the approaching storm. "We'd best get these children home before it hits proper." Sophia began organizing the students, pairing the younger ones with older siblings or neighbors who lived in the same direction. Parents who had come to help with the roof loaded children into wagons. "Timothy's father is at the mine," Sophia said to Yates as they watched the schoolyard empty. "He won't be able to come for him with the storm coming. I can take him," Yates offered, surprising himself. "The Blackstone place is on my way." Timothy, who had been helping gather tools, looked up with undisguised excitement. "Really, I can ride in your wagon, Mr. Stringer." "If it's all right with Miss Fleming," Yates replied, glancing at Sophia for confirmation. "Of course," she agreed. "But what about you, Sophia? I don't like the thought of you walking home in this weather." The rain was falling steadily now, and the first real gust of wind bent the trees along the schoolyard. "I live just behind the mercantile," she said. "It's not far." Another flash of lightning, closer this time, was followed almost immediately by a crack of thunder. The storm was moving quickly. "I'll drive you," Yates decided. "Both of you. We can drop off Timothy, then see you home safely." There was no time for further discussion. The three of them hurried to Yates' wagon just as the heavens truly opened. Rain poured down in sheets, turning the dirt road into mud within minutes. Timothy huddled between the adults on the wagon seat, his small body warm against Yates' side. The boy chattered excitedly about the storm, the roof, and how his friends were all impressed that he got to help the real cowboys with the repairs. The Blackstone home was a small but well-kept cabin on the outskirts of town. Mrs. Blackstone ran out to meet them, relief evident on her face as Yates handed Timothy down from the wagon. "Thank you kindly, Mr. Stringer," she said, pulling her son close. "We've heard about the good work you're doing at the school. Won't you come in until the storm passes?" "Thank you, madam, but I need to see Miss Fleming home," Yates replied, tipping his hat despite the rain. Mrs. Blackstone's eyebrows rose slightly, and a knowing smile played at her lips. "Of course. Good day to you both." Back in the wagon with Timothy safely delivered, Yates became acutely aware of Sophia beside him. Her dress was damp, and a strand of wet hair clung to her cheek. Without thinking, he reached over and brushed it away, his fingers grazing her skin. "Sorry," he said gruffly, returning his hand to the reins. "Don't be," she replied softly, and something in her tone made him glance at her. Their eyes met briefly before he looked away, focusing on the muddy road ahead. The mercantile came into view, and behind it, a small white cottage that must be Sophia's home. Yates pulled the wagon as close as possible to her front porch, then jumped down to help her descend. The rain was still coming down in torrents, and by the time they reached her door, they were both soaked through. Sophia fumbled with her key, her fingers stiff with cold. "Let me," Yates said, taking the key gently from her hand. Their fingers touched, and despite the chill of the rain, warmth spread up his arm. He opened the door, then hesitated on the threshold. "I should get going. Make sure the schoolhouse roof is holding." "You'll catch your death," Sophia protested. "At least come in until the worst passes." "I can make coffee to warm you up." Reason told him to decline, to maintain the careful distance he had kept from everyone for 3 long years. But the thought of returning to his empty house, with only the sound of rain on the roof for company, suddenly seemed unbearable. "Coffee would be welcome," he conceded, stepping into her home. The cottage was small but welcoming. Books lined nearly every available surface, and colorful quilts draped the simple furniture. A small fire burned in the hearth, left banked while she was at school, and Sophia immediately set about building it up. "There's a blanket on the chair," she said, nodding toward a rocking chair near the fire. "You should take off that wet coat and warm yourself while I make the coffee." Yates removed his dripping coat and hat, hanging them on a peg by the door. The blanket was soft and smelled faintly of lavender as he wrapped it around his shoulders, settling into the chair by the fire. The simple domesticity of the scene, the crackling fire, Sophia moving about her kitchen, the rain drumming on the roof created a sense of peace he had almost forgotten could exist. Sophia returned with 2 steaming cups, her own wet shawl replaced by a dry one. She pulled another chair close to the fire and sat facing him, their knees almost touching in the small space. "I think the roof will hold," she said, passing him a cup. "You did good work." "We all did," Yates corrected. "It was a community effort." "Yes, but it wouldn't have happened without you," she held his gaze. "You brought them together, Yates. You reminded them what it means to be neighbors." He looked down into his coffee, uncomfortable with her praise. "They just needed someone to show them where to start." "And why did you start?" she asked softly. "Why did you come that first day?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Yates could have given any number of practical answers. The roof needed fixing. Winter was coming. It was the right thing to do. All would have been true, but none would have been the whole truth. "Because you asked me to," he said finally, raising his eyes to meet hers. "Because you saw something in me that I thought was gone." Sophia's expression softened, and she reached out to place her hand over his. "It was never gone, Yates, just buried beneath the grief." The simple touch of her hand anchored him, warm and real in a way nothing had felt since he lost his family. Outside, the storm raged, but inside this small cottage, something fragile and new was taking root. They talked as the afternoon waned, sharing stories of their lives before Marysvale. Yates told her about growing up in Ohio, learning carpentry at his father's side, and his dreams of building a legacy that would outlast him. Sophia spoke of her childhood in Pennsylvania, her love of books, and her decision to become a teacher after losing her fiancé in the war. "We've both known loss," she observed as shadows lengthened across the room, "but loss doesn't have to define us forever." "No," Yates agreed, surprising himself with the admission. "I'm beginning to see that." When the rain finally subsided, leaving a fresh, washed world outside the windows, Yates reluctantly rose to leave. At the door, he turned to Sophia, words suddenly difficult to find. "Thank you," he said simply, "for the coffee and the conversation. Will I see you tomorrow?" she asked. "The roof still needs finishing." "Yes," he promised. "Tomorrow." As he drove home through the clearing evening, Yates realized that for the first time in 3 years, he was looking forward to the day ahead rather than simply enduring it. And on his porch, where Daniel's boots still sat on the railing, he paused before taking them inside, holding them not with desperate grief but with a gentler remembrance. "Fill them with hope again," Sophia had said. Perhaps that was possible after all. The schoolhouse roof was completed 2 days later, sturdy and weathertight against the coming winter. The town held a small celebration in the schoolyard, with tables of food and children playing games. Yates, who would once have avoided such a gathering at all costs, found himself at its center, accepting thanks and handshakes from parents and townspeople he had barely spoken to in years. Sophia moved through the crowd with easy grace, her face alight with joy at the success of the project. Whenever her eyes met Yates, something silent but profound passed between them, a shared understanding, a connection that deepened with each passing day. As the celebration wound down and families began to head home, Mayor Reynolds approached Yates with an unexpected proposition. "The town council met last night," he said, his voice carrying the formal tone of official business. "We've been neglecting some of our infrastructure for too long. This school roof business opened our eyes to that. We'd like to hire you, Stringer, to oversee some repairs around town. The bridge over Sevier River needs work before spring floods, and the church steeple is listing something awful." Yates was taken aback. "I'm a rancher, not a builder by trade." "You're both, seems to me," Reynolds countered. "And right now, this town needs your building skills more than it needs another struggling cattle operation. We can pay fair wages, and it would be a service to the community." The offer hung in the air, unexpected and yet somehow right. Yates glanced across the schoolyard, where Sophia was helping a young girl wind a ribbon around a maypole, her laugh carrying on the afternoon breeze. "I'll think about it," he promised, which was more than he would have offered just weeks ago. Reynolds clapped him on the shoulder. "That's all I ask. Think on it and let me know." Later, as the last of the celebration was cleared away, Yates found Sophia sitting alone on the schoolhouse steps, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. "May I join you?" he asked. She smiled up at him, patting the space beside her. "I was hoping you would." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, shoulders almost touching. "The mayor offered me a job," Yates said finally. "Wants me to oversee repairs around town. And what did you tell him?" "That I'd think about it." Sophia nodded, her eyes still on the sunset. "It would be good work, work that matters." "My ranch matters," Yates said, though without conviction. The truth was that he had let the ranch slide into near ruin over the past 3 years, focusing only on the minimum needed to keep it running. Of course it does, Sophia agreed. But is it what you want now? Is it what brings you purpose? The question cut to the heart of things, as her questions often did. Yates considered it carefully. When I was working on the roof, he said slowly, I felt useful again, like what I was doing made a difference. It did make a difference, not just to the school but to the town, to the children. She paused. To me. Their eyes met, and Yates felt something shift between them, an acknowledgement of the feelings that had been growing since that first evening on his porch. Would you walk with me? He asked suddenly. Sunday afternoon after church. There's a place up by the river I'd like to show you. Sophia's smile was like sunrise. I'd like that very much. Sunday dawned clear and cool, a perfect early autumn day. Yates dressed with more care than usual, choosing a clean shirt and his best boots. For the first time in 3 years, he attended the church service, slipping into a back pew just as the congregation began the first hymn. He felt eyes on him throughout the service, the whispers and glances of people surprised to see the reclusive rancher among them again. But it was only one pair of eyes he truly cared about, Sophia's warm gaze finding his across the small church. Her smile, a private message meant only for him. After the service, they walked together along the river path, away from the town and into the golden stillness of the aspens that lined the Sevier River. Their conversation flowed easily, punctuated by comfortable silences that needed no filling. This is where I wanted to bring you, Yates said as they rounded a bend in the river. Before them, a small clearing opened up, with a perfect view of the valley below and the mountains beyond. A single large boulder sat at the edge, smooth and flat on top like a natural bench. It's beautiful, Sophia breathed, taking in the panorama. I found this place my first month in Marysvale, Yates explained as they sat on the boulder. Used to come here to think, to make plans for the future. Later, I brought Margaret here, my wife, asked her to marry me on this very spot. He hadn't spoken of Margaret so directly to anyone in years, but with Sophia, the words came naturally. She must have loved it, Sophia said gently. She did. We'd picnic here sometimes, and later we'd bring Daniel. His voice caught slightly on his son's name, but the pain was tempered now with fond remembrance rather than raw grief. He loved to throw pebbles in the river, see how far they'd go. Sophia's hand found his, her fingers intertwining with his larger ones. Thank you for sharing this with me. For sharing them with me. Yates looked down at their joined hands, then up at her face, open, honest, and so very alive. In that moment, he made a decision that had been forming since the day she first stood on his porch and challenged him to fill his son's boots with hope again. I'm going to take the job, he said. Help fix what needs fixing in town. Sophia's face lit up with genuine happiness. I think that's wonderful. And I'm going to fix up the ranch too, he continued. Not let it fall apart anymore. Maybe breed horses instead of cattle. Always had a better hand with horses anyway. You'll be busy, she observed, though her tone was approving. Too busy to call on a certain schoolteacher, do you think? He asked, his heart suddenly pounding like a boy's despite his 42 years. Sophia's smile deepened. I think that certain schoolteacher would be very disappointed if you were too busy for that. The weeks that followed took on a rhythm that brought new life to Yates' days. Mornings were spent on town projects, repairing the church steeple, reinforcing the bridge supports, fixing the sagging porch of the mercantile. Afternoons were devoted to his ranch, beginning the long process of restoration and transformation. And evenings were increasingly spent with Sophia. Sometimes they walked along the river or rode out to see the sunset from their special clearing. Other times they sat on her porch or his, talking long into the night about books she loved, places he had seen, dreams they both still harbored. The town noticed, of course. In a place like Marysvale, little went unobserved. But the whispers were kind, approving. The rancher who had retreated into grief was coming back to life, and the schoolteacher who had brought learning to their children was the one guiding him home. One crisp November evening, as they sat before the fire in Yates' newly refurbished parlor, Sophia noticed something different on the mantelpiece. "Daniel's boots," she said softly, rising to look more closely. The small leather boots had been cleaned and oiled and now sat proudly displayed above the hearth. But they were no longer empty. A small carved wooden horse stood in one, and in the other, a miniature book, its tiny pages filled with microscopic writing. "What does it say?" she asked, peering at the tiny book. "Stories," Yates replied, coming to stand beside her. "Daniel's favorite stories that I used to tell him. I wrote them down so they wouldn't be forgotten." Sophia turned to him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You filled them with hope again." "You showed me how," he said simply. His hand reached up to touch her cheek, and she leaned into his palm, her eyes never leaving his. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility and promise. "I'm falling in love with you, Sophia Fleming," he said, the words coming straight from his heart without detour through his mind. "I never thought I'd say those words to anyone again, but there they are, and I mean them with everything I am." "Yates," she whispered, her voice catching. "I've been falling in love with you since the day you showed up at the schoolhouse with your toolbox and your scowl, trying so hard not to care but caring so deeply anyway." When he kissed her, it was gentle at first, a question, an offering. Her response was certain, her arms winding around his neck as the kiss deepened into something that felt like coming home after a very long journey. Later, as they sat close together on the sofa, plans and dreams spilling out between them, Yates felt a lightness in his chest that had been absent for so long he had almost forgotten its existence. Grief would always be part of his story, as it was part of Sophia's. But it was no longer the whole story, no longer the force that defined his days and nights. "I want to marry you," he said, surprising himself with the directness of it. "Not right away, I know this is still new and we have time, but I want you to know that's where my heart is heading." Sophia's smile was radiant. "My heart has been heading there too. And yes, we have time, but I already know my answer will be yes, whenever you decide to ask properly." The winter of 1876-1877 was remembered in Marysvale as a season of transformation. The town itself seemed to come alive with renewed purpose as buildings were repaired, the bridge was strengthened, and the schoolhouse stood warm and dry through even the harshest storms. Yates Stringer, once the town's most dedicated recluse, became a fixture of community life again. He supervised the town projects with quiet competence, attended social gatherings with increasing comfort, and even helped organize a Christmas pageant when Sophia mentioned needing more adult volunteers. Their courtship progressed through winter into spring, a steady deepening of connection that the whole town watched with approving eyes. Children who had once been warned to stay away from that gloomy Stringer place now delighted in visits to the ranch, where Yates was training a pair of gentle ponies specifically for giving rides to the schoolchildren. Timothy Blackstone became a particular favorite at the ranch, showing an aptitude with horses that Yates quietly nurtured. The boy's father, seeing his son's joy, began stopping by after his shifts at the mine, eventually forming a friendship with Yates that would have seemed impossible months before. On a perfect day in late May, with wildflowers carpeting the valley and the mountains still capped with snow, Yates took Sophia back to their special clearing by the river. A picnic basket lay packed in the wagon, but more importantly, a small velvet box burned a hole in his pocket. The boulder where they had sat so many times now held a small wooden bench, crafted by Yates' hands, its back carved with intertwining vines and flowers. "You made this," Sophia said, running her fingers over the detailed carving. "Seemed more comfortable than a rock for all the time we spend up here," Yates replied with a smile. "Do you like it? It's beautiful." She sat on the bench, testing its comfort. "Perfect." Yates didn't sit beside her immediately. Instead, he took both her hands in his and drew her to her feet again. "Sophia Fleming," he began, his voice steady despite the drumming of his heart, "when you came to my porch last fall with bread and determined eyes, I was a man half dead. I existed, but I wasn't living." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "You saw something in me worth saving, even when I couldn't see it myself." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing the small box. "You told me to fill my son's boots with hope again, and because of you I have. Now I want to fill the rest of my days with you beside me." He opened the box, revealing a ring with a small but perfect sapphire, the color of the Montana sky where he had first learned what it meant to dream of a future. "Will you marry me, Sophia? Will you build a life with me here in Marysvale?" Tears spilled onto Sophia's cheeks, but her smile was joyous. "Yes, Yates Stringer. Yes to all of it." The ring slipped perfectly onto her finger, and when he kissed her, it felt like a promise kept, a new beginning built on the foundations of all they had been and all they might become. They were married on a sunny Saturday in July, in the small church whose steeple Yates had repaired. The entire town turned out for the celebration, which spilled from the church into the town square and lasted well into the evening. Timothy Blackstone proudly served as ring bearer, his chest puffed out with importance as he carried the rings on a small pillow Sophia had embroidered for the occasion. Mayor Reynolds performed the ceremony, his usual gruff manner softened by the evident joy of the couple before him. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Utah," he proclaimed with uncharacteristic emotion, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride, Yates." The cheer that went up from the congregation as they sealed their vows with a kiss was hearty enough to be heard, some said, clear to Salt Lake City. The reception that followed was a true community affair, with tables of food prepared by the women of Marysvale, music provided by a local fiddle band, and dancing that continued under lantern light as the summer evening slowly darkened to night. Sophia, radiant in a gown of pale blue that matched her sapphire ring, moved among the guests with natural grace, her hand rarely leaving Yates. And Yates, who once could barely tolerate a handshake, found himself swept up in the celebration, accepting congratulations and well wishes with genuine warmth. As the newly married couple prepared to leave the celebration for their honeymoon journey to Salt Lake City, Timothy darted forward with one last gift, a small carved horse, similar to the one that sat in Daniel's boot on the mantelpiece. "I made it myself," the boy announced proudly. "Mr. Stringer showed me how." Sophia knelt to accept the gift, her eyes filling with tears as she hugged the child. "It's beautiful, Timothy. We'll treasure it always." Yates ruffled the boy's hair affectionately. "Fine craftsmanship there, Timothy. You've got a real talent." The boy beamed under the praise. "Will you still teach me about horses when you come back?" "Count on it," Yates promised. "We've got that new colt that needs training, and I could use a good assistant." As they drove away amid a shower of rice and good wishes, Sophia leaned against Yates' shoulder, the carved horse cradled carefully in her hands. "You've made quite an impression on that boy," she observed. "He reminds me a bit of Daniel," Yates admitted. "Same curiosity, same way of looking at the world as if everything in it is wonderful and new." Sophia's hand found his, squeezing gently. "You're good for him. For all the children, really. They need men like you in their lives, men who show them how to build, how to care, how to heal from life's hardest blows. Yates felt a fullness in his chest that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with finding purpose again. Never thought I'd be teaching anyone anything after Daniel died. Figured I had nothing left to give. You have so much to give, Sophia countered. And now we have a lifetime to give it together. Their honeymoon in Salt Lake City was a whirlwind of new experiences, visits to theaters and restaurants finer than anything available in Marysville, shopping for furnishings for their home, and quiet evenings planning their future together. Upon their return, they settled into the ranch house, which Yates had spent months renovating in preparation for his bride. The faded gray exterior now gleamed with fresh white paint. The sagging porch had been rebuilt, and inside, the rooms were bright and welcoming, a blend of Yates' sturdy craftsmanship and touches of beauty that Sophia had chosen. Daniel's room remained, transformed into a small library where Sophia could house her beloved books and perhaps, someday, read to children of their own. Daniel's boots stayed on the mantelpiece, no longer symbols of emptiness and loss but reminders of love that endured beyond grief. The transition from solitary rancher to married man came more naturally to Yates than he might have expected. Having Sophia's presence in his home, her laughter filling rooms that had known only silence, her warmth beside him at night, all felt right in a way he had never thought to feel again. Sophia continued teaching at the schoolhouse, her passion for education undiminished by marriage. If anything, her joy in her work seemed to grow as her personal happiness increased. Yates would often ride into town with her in the mornings, continuing his work on town projects before returning to the ranch in the afternoons. They settled into a rhythm of work and togetherness, of shared purpose and private moments, building a life that honored the past while embracing the future with open hearts. Winter came again to Marysville, but this year, it brought a different kind of change to the Stringer household. As Christmas approached, Sophia shared news that filled Yates with a complex mixture of joy and trepidation. They were expecting a child in the summer. "Are you happy?" she asked, searching his face after telling him. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," he assured her, gathering her into his arms. "But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't scared too." "I know," she whispered against his chest. "I am too. Loving always comes with risk, but oh, Yates, think of the joy this child will bring." He placed a hand gently on her still flat stomach, wonder overcoming fear. "Our child," he said softly. A new beginning. That Christmas was unlike any Yates had experienced since losing his family. The ranch house gleamed with decorations. A tall pine tree stood in the corner of the parlor, draped in popcorn strings and paper ornaments made by Sophia's students, and the air was filled with the scent of gingerbread and cider. Friends from town visited throughout the holiday week: the Blackstones, Mayor Reynolds and his wife, Samuel Tucker and his family, and many others who had become part of the tapestry of their lives over the past year. On Christmas Eve, as they sat alone before the fire after the last guests had departed, Sophia presented Yates with a special gift: a handcrafted leather-bound journal, its pages blank and waiting. "For new stories," she explained as he ran his fingers over the fine binding. "For our child and perhaps for others too. Your stories shouldn't stay locked inside, Yates. They're too good, too important not to share." The gesture touched him deeply. "I'm not sure I know how to write for anyone but myself," he admitted. "Start with what you know," she suggested. "The stories you told Daniel, the ones you've preserved in his boot. Write them down properly, with all the details and heart you put into them when you told them aloud." He considered this, turning the journal in his hands. "You really think others might want to read my stories?" I know they would, Sophia said firmly. Every child who visits this ranch begs you for a story. Every repair project in town takes twice as long because men stop working to listen when you start telling tales about your travels or the war or the early days in Utah Territory. You have a gift, Yates. It's time to share it beyond just our hearth. Something sparked in him at her words, a new possibility, a different kind of legacy than he had ever envisioned for himself. That night, after Sophia had gone to bed, he sat at his desk with the new journal open before him and began to write. The words came slowly at first, then faster, as the story of a young boy and his first horse took shape on the page. Spring brought new growth to the valley and increasing evidence of the life growing within Sophia. Her belly swelled gracefully, and Yates found himself captivated by the miracle unfolding before his eyes. He attended to her with tender care, ensuring she rested enough while respecting her determination to continue teaching until the end of the school term. The town watched over their schoolteacher with proprietary concern. Women brought special teas and remedies for morning sickness, offered advice both useful and questionable, and organized a sewing circle to create a layette for the coming baby. Men stopped by the ranch more frequently, ostensibly to check on various projects but really to make sure Yates wasn't overworking himself between town repairs, ranch duties, and caring for his pregnant wife. As summer approached, Yates completed a special project he had been working on in secret, a cradle, crafted from cherry wood he had specially ordered from back east. Each piece was carefully shaped and joined, the headboard delicately carved with a pattern of leaves and small animals that might delight a child's imagination. When he presented it to Sophia, her eyes filled with tears of appreciation. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," she said, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "Our baby will sleep surrounded by your love and craftsmanship." "Our love," he corrected, placing his hand over hers. "Everything good I've built this past year has been because of you, Sophia. You brought me back to life." On a warm evening in late July, with summer thunderstorms building over the western mountains, Sophia went into labor. The midwife was summoned, along with Dr. Peterson from 2 towns over, who had promised to attend the birth. Yates paced the porch as women took over his bedroom, boiling water, arranging clean linens, and shooing him outside where his nervousness wouldn't disturb the birthing process. Hours passed, the storms came and went, and still he waited, alternating between prayer and silent bargaining with a God he had been angry with for years. "Not her," he whispered into the night air. "Please, not her too." The first light of dawn was breaking over the eastern mountains when the bedroom door finally opened and the midwife emerged, her lined face breaking into a smile. "You can go in now, Mr. Stringer," she said. "Your wife and son are waiting for you." A son. The word echoed in Yates' mind as he entered the room on unsteady legs. Sophia lay propped against pillows, tired but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up as he approached, her smile like sunshine breaking through clouds. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Yates sat carefully on the edge of the bed, emotion closing his throat as she placed the baby in his arms. The tiny face, red and wrinkled from the journey into the world, was the most perfect thing he had ever seen. A tuft of dark hair crowned the small head, and as Yates watched, the baby's eyes opened briefly newborn blue, but with a hint of his mother's intelligence already evident. "He's beautiful," Yates managed, his voice rough with feeling. "I thought we might call him Samuel," Sophia suggested. "After your father." Yates nodded, unable to speak for a moment. His father had been a builder too, a creator of things meant to last. It seemed right that his grandson should carry his name into the future. "Samuel Daniel Stringer," he said finally, "if that's all right with you." Sophia's eyes glistened with tears. "It's perfect." As news of Samuel's birth spread through town, visitors began arriving at the ranch, bearing gifts and well wishes for the new parents. Timothy Blackstone was among the first, proudly presenting a small wooden rattle he had carved himself under Yates' guidance. "Is he big enough to play with it yet?" the boy asked, peering curiously at the sleeping infant. "Not quite yet," Sophia explained gently, "but soon he'll be holding it and making all kinds of noise." "Can I teach him about horses when he's bigger?" Timothy wanted to know. "Like Mr. Stringer teaches me. I'm counting on it," Yates said, ruffling the boy's hair. "Every young man needs a good mentor, and you'll be 10 years ahead of him in experience." Life with a newborn transformed the rhythm of the Stringer household once again. Nights became a patchwork of sleep and waking, days centered around the needs and wonders of their small son. Yates found himself marveling at every tiny change: the strengthening of Samuel's neck, the first real smile, the way his little fingers wrapped tightly around his father's much larger one. Sophia recovered quickly from the birth, and soon was balancing motherhood with a modified teaching schedule, bringing Samuel to school with her 2 days a week, while a mother's helper watched him at home the other 3. The children adored having a baby in the classroom, and Sophia incorporated him into lessons on growth, development, and family structures. As Samuel grew from infant to toddler, the ranch flourished as well. Yates' horse breeding program began to gain recognition beyond Marysville, with buyers coming from as far as California to purchase his carefully trained stock. The town projects continued, though at a reduced pace, as Yates chose to spend more time with his family and developing his writing. The journal Sophia had given him that first Christmas was long since filled, and several more besides. To his surprise and quiet pride, a publisher in Salt Lake City had expressed interest in his stories for children, particularly those featuring the adventures of a boy and his horse in the early days of Utah Territory. "They want to publish a collection," he told Sophia one evening as they sat on the porch watching 2-year-old Samuel toddle after fireflies in the yard. "Said the stories have authentic voice and regional charm, whatever that means." "It means you're a real writer," Sophia said, squeezing his hand. "I knew you would be." "Seems strange," he admitted. "Rancher, builder, writer, never thought I'd be any of those things when I was young. Certainly never thought I'd be all 3. "Life has a way of revealing our gifts when we're ready to use them," Sophia observed. "Sometimes through joy, sometimes through sorrow." Yates nodded, watching his son chase another firefly with determined concentration. "I understand now, something I couldn't see before. When Daniel died, I thought that was the end of my story, but it was just a terrible chapter in a longer tale." Sophia leaned her head against his shoulder, her hand still clasped in his. "And there are many chapters yet to be written." As if to prove her point, she placed his hand gently on her abdomen. "Including one that will begin around Christmas if my calculations are correct." Yates turned to her, joy spreading across his face. "Truly." "Another baby," she nodded, her eyes shining. "Truly." "Samuel will have a brother or sister to grow up with." That night, after Sophia and Samuel were asleep, Yates stood at the mantelpiece, looking at his first son's boots still displayed there. The carved horse and tiny book of stories remained inside them, but they no longer represented emptiness filled with memories. Now they were vessels overflowing with new hope, new life, new stories yet to be told. "Thank you," he whispered to the memory of his first son, "for teaching me how to love, even when it hurt, for making room in my heart for Sophia and Samuel and this new little one on the way." He touched the small boots gently. "You'll always be part of our family." I promise to tell your brother and sister all about you, the brave, kind boy who shared his candy and loved to throw pebbles in the river." From the bedroom, Samuel made a small sound in his sleep, and Yates went to check on him. The toddler lay sprawled across his small bed, dark hair tousled, one arm flung over his favorite stuffed horse. The sight filled Yates with a gratitude so profound it felt like a physical presence in his chest. Outside, the stars wheeled above Marysvale, the same stars that had witnessed his grief and isolation, now bearing witness to his joy and connection. The boots on the mantelpiece would always remind him of what he had lost, but more importantly, they reminded him of Sophia's wisdom that day on his porch, that empty spaces could be filled again, not with replacements for what was lost, but with new purpose, new love, new hope. And as the years passed in Marysvale, the Stringer family grew and flourished. Samuel was joined by a sister, Margaret, born on Christmas Eve as predicted, and 2 years later by another brother, William. The ranch expanded, the horse breeding program thrived, and Yates' children's books found audiences far beyond Utah territory. Sophia continued teaching until she was appointed superintendent of schools for the county, a position that allowed her to implement educational innovations she had long advocated for. Her proudest achievement was establishing the first lending library in Marysvale, housed in a building Yates constructed specifically for the purpose. Timothy Blackstone, grown into a capable young man under Yates' mentorship, became the ranch's head trainer, with a special gift for working with even the most difficult horses. When he married a young woman from a neighboring town, Yates helped them build a small house on Stringer land, ensuring the legacy of knowledge and care would continue to the next generation. And through it all, Daniel's boots remained on the mantelpiece, no longer symbols of grief and emptiness, but reminders of the journey that had brought them all together. Reminders that hope could be reborn, that love could bloom again, even in the most barren soil. On quiet evenings, Yates would sometimes tell his children stories about their older brother who lived now only in memory. They would gather at his feet as he described Daniel's laugh, his kindness, the way he had loved animals and adventure. "Is he an angel now, Pa?" Young Margaret once asked, her eyes wide with wonder. "I believe he is," Yates replied, drawing his daughter onto his lap, "watching over all of us." "Is he happy that we're here?" William wanted to know. Yates met Sophia's eyes across the room, seeing in them the same certainty he felt in his heart. "Yes," he said confidently. "He's very happy. He knows how much we love him and how much we love each other." And in that moment, surrounded by the family he had never dared hope for after his first devastating loss, Yates Stringer understood the full meaning of what Sophia had told him that fateful day on his porch. She had asked him to fill his son's empty boots with hope again. And in doing so, he had filled not just the boots but his entire life with love, with purpose, with joy that was all the more precious for having been rediscovered after profound grief. It was a lesson he would pass down to his children and, through his stories, to generations beyond that. Even in our darkest moments, hope waits patiently to be rekindled, and love, once known, can find its way home to us again.